Hey, everybody, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're looking at something that I think we can all relate to, and that is how to really seriously study.
It can be a struggle.
Yeah. You know those times where you've got a textbook just staring you in the face, and all of a sudden cleaning your room just sounds so much more appealing?
Totally.
I think we've all been there.
Yeah. So for this deep dive, we're going to be taking apart an article from WikiHow. It's called Three Ways to Force Yourself to Seriously Study. Now, I know that title might sound a little bit intimidating, but I think there's some actually really good advice in here.
Yeah, there are some hidden gems for sure.
So get ready to unlock those secrets that'll make studying feel a little less like a chore. And maybe even, dare I say, enjoyable.
Yeah, we're definitely not advocating for forcing yourself to study.
Yeah.
But it's more about figuring out what works best for you and understanding the psychology behind how to study well.
Okay, so let's jump into the first takeaway here, and that's motivation.
Mm.
The article suggests, starting by listing out the reasons why studying is important for you. It sounds kind of simple, but I can see how having that clear purpose in mind could really help.
Yeah. It's really all about connecting with your own personal why. Why are you studying in the first place? Think about it. Are you doing this to ace your next exam or, maybe get your dream job?
Yeah.
Or, hey, even just to impress your friends with all your newfound knowledge. Whatever it is, you got to write it down and, keep it somewhere visible. So when you're feeling like you're going to procrastinate, you've got that reminder of what you're actually working toward.
Like your own personal hype team.
Yeah, exactly.
But instead of pom-poms, they've got motivation and knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah. And the cool thing about this approach is that it kind of works with how our brains work.
Yeah.
When you've got a clear purpose, your brain is more likely to pay attention to the material and actually engage with it. It's not just random facts and figures anymore, it's
Yeah.
actually a stepping stone to get to something that you really care about.
Yeah, so it's like changing your mindset from, I have to study, to, I want to learn this because.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
The article suggests making even the most boring subjects more engaging by finding ways to connect them to your own life.
It might sound a little weird, but hear me out.
Okay, I'm listening. Give me an example.
Yeah.
How could you possibly make medieval history relevant to someone's daily life?
Okay, well, let's say you're trying to remember all those complicated details about feudalism.
Instead of just trying to memorize all the facts, what if you thought about the motivations of the people involved and, the power dynamics, You could even compare the relationships between lords and vassals to modern day hierarchies, in companies or even, friend groups. Suddenly those historical figures become way more relatable and the ideas actually start to click.
That's actually a really cool way to think about it. And, this reminds me of something I used to do when I was studying literature. I try to put myself in the shoes of the characters. Imagine how I would react in their situation.
Yeah.
Made those classic novels way more engaging, and I actually remember the details better.
Exactly. It's all about finding those personal connections, those aha moments that help the information stick. And it doesn't have to be just for school subjects. You can use this to learn anything new, like a language or a musical instrument, or even a really complicated recipe.
So it's like finding those little hooks to hang the information on.
Yeah.
I love that. It's like turning studying into a giant connect-the-dots game. Okay. I'm curious about this next part, which the article calls scheduling for success. Tell me more about that.
So it basically emphasizes having a regular study routine and trying to stick to it as much as you can.
Okay.
It might sound kind of repetitive, but there's a reason why this advice is given all the time. It actually works.
I know routines are really popular these days, but I kind of have to admit I'm a little bit skeptical. Don't some people work better when they're more spontaneous and flexible? How can a rigid schedule work for everyone?
That's a really good point. And you're right, one size fits all rarely works when we're talking about something as personal as studying. But the main idea here is consistency, not being super rigid. You're not trying to force yourself into this crazy strict timetable. It's more about creating a rhythm for your study sessions.
Right.
It's almost like setting an appointment with your most important client, which is yourself.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
Okay, but what about those days when life just throws you a curveball and your perfectly planned study session totally gets derailed?
Well, that's where the flexibility comes in,
Yeah.
You want to have a plan A, but also be ready with a plan B or even a plan C. Life happens and sometimes your schedule needs to change. But the important thing is to not let those disruptions completely throw you off track. If you miss a study session, don't beat yourself up about it. Just get back on track as soon as you can.
So it's about like finding that balance between structure and flexibility.
Exactly.
Having that routine gives you a good foundation, but you also got to be able to adjust when you need to.
Exactly. Now, here's a really helpful tip from the article that I think you'll appreciate. It suggests breaking down your study material into smaller, more manageable chunks. So instead of trying to tackle a whole chapter in one, go try focusing on like a specific section or concept at a time.
Yeah, this is so true. I used to make that mistake all the time back in college. I would sit down with like this mountain of information and just feel completely overwhelmed before even getting started.
Yeah.
Breaking it down into smaller pieces makes it way less daunting for sure.
It's like that old saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Right.
Same goes for studying. By breaking those huge tasks into smaller pieces, you create a sense of progress, and you actually feel like you're getting somewhere, which can help keep you motivated and avoid burnout.
It's all about those small wins, right? Speaking of which, let's move on to what might be the biggest challenge for a lot of us: distractions. The article has a whole section on making a distraction-free study space. But honestly, some of those tips sound a little too perfect. Is it even possible to totally disconnect these days?
You're totally right. In our world, distractions are everywhere. But before we get into the specifics, let's take a second to understand, like, why distractions even work on us. Our brains are literally wired to look for new and exciting things. It's a survival thing that helped our ancestors stay safe in, like, dangerous situations.
So you're saying it's not our fault that our brains love getting those dopamine hits from a new notification or like a funny meme?
Exactly, but just because it's natural doesn't mean we can't do anything about it.
Right.
The key is to be aware of those things that trigger us and then come up with strategies to manage them.
Yeah.
And that's where those tips from the article are helpful.
Okay.
It suggests having a dedicated place to study, like somewhere quiet in your home or maybe at a library. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. It could be just like clearing off a corner of your desk or, finding a comfy spot on the floor.
Yeah, it's like training your brain to switch into study mode as soon as you sit down in that spot.
Exactly. And here's another simple but effective tip. Turn off those notifications. I know it sounds obvious, but it's amazing how those little pings and buzzes can totally mess with our focus.
Right. It's like our brain goes, ooh, shiny object. And then suddenly we're scrolling through social media or checking the emails.
Exactly. And even if you think you're good at multitasking, research has shown that our brains aren't really designed for it. When we try to do a bunch of things at once, we end up doing each task worse.
Okay, so having a dedicated study spot and turning off notifications are good starting points. But distractions can be really sneaky. They can even come from inside our own heads. What about those times when you're trying to focus, but your mind keeps wandering to your to-do list or, that argument you had earlier?
Ah, yes, the dreaded internal distractions. The article actually has a really cool way to deal with those. It suggests keeping a blank piece of paper close by and writing down any distracting thoughts that pop into your head.
Wait, so instead of trying to push those thoughts away, we're supposed to acknowledge them and then let them go?
Exactly. It's like giving your brain permission to notice those thoughts without letting them take over your whole study session. Once you write them down, you can basically be like, okay, I'll deal with that later. Right now, I'm focusing on studying.
I love that. Such a simple but effective way to manage those mental distractions. It's like having a worry box for your thoughts.
Exactly. And speaking of managing distractions, let's talk about the elephant in the room, music. Some people say it helps them focus, while others find it super distracting. What's your take on listening to music while studying?
I think this is one of those things that really depends on the person. I'm definitely a silence is golden kind of person when I study. But I know plenty of people who find that certain types of music help them block out distractions and get into a groove.
Yeah, I agree. There's no right or wrong answer here. The important thing is to try different things and figure out what works for you. If you do decide to listen to music while you study, I'd suggest going for instrumental music or nature sounds because lyrics can be distracting.
And maybe avoid anything too upbeat or catchy unless you want to end up singing along instead of studying.
Exactly. It's all about finding the right balance. And speaking of balance, the article also mentions how important it is to take breaks. It might seem counterintuitive to stop studying when you're trying to be productive, but trust me, breaks are super important for both your mind and body.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Yeah.
Tell me more about these benefits of taking breaks.
Well, first of all, taking breaks helps you avoid burnout. When we force ourselves to focus for a long time without a break, our concentration starts to fade and we become less productive.
It's like trying to run a marathon without stopping. You're going to hit a wall eventually.
Exactly. Taking breaks gives your brain a chance to rest and recharge, so you can come back to studying feeling refreshed and focused. Plus, sitting for hours can be bad for your physical health, too. Getting up and moving around can help your circulation, reduce muscle tension, and even improve your mood.
So taking breaks isn't just about slacking off.
Right.
It's actually a smart way to be more productive and feel better overall. It's like hitting the refresh button on your brain and body.
Exactly. And speaking of refreshing, let's talk about one of my favorite study techniques, the Pomodoro technique. Have you heard of it?
I have. It's where you switch back and forth between focused work sessions and short breaks, right?
Exactly. The basic idea is to set a timer for 25 minutes of focused work, followed by a 5-minute break. After you do that 4 times, you take a longer break, like 15 or 20 minutes. This helps you stay on track while also making sure you're taking those breaks to avoid getting mentally and physically exhausted.
Sounds like a great way to work those breaks in without getting totally sidetracked.
Hmm.
I can see how that would be helpful, especially for people who get super focused and forget to take care of themselves.
Yeah, it's a great tool for people who struggle with procrastination or have trouble staying on task, and you can adjust it to fit your own needs. You can change the length of the work sessions and breaks to match your attention span and how much energy you have.
So it's all about finding a rhythm that works for you.
Hmm.
And, this brings us to another important part of studying that the article mentions creating a supportive study environment. And I'm not just talking about the physical space, but also the people you surround yourself with.
Yeah, that's a great point. The people we spend time with can have a huge impact on how motivated and productive we are. If you're always around people who distract you or, discourage you from reaching your goals, it's going to be so much harder to stay focused and on track.
Yeah, it's like trying to swim upstream.
Yeah,
You might eventually get there, but it's way harder than if you had the current helping you along.
exactly. But if you're around supportive friends, family members, or study buddies who are also working towards their goals, you create this positive, encouraging environment that can help you stay motivated and accountable.
It's like having your own personal cheer squad, but instead of pom-poms, they're all about encouragement and accountability. And speaking of study buddies, the article mentions how helpful it can be to have a study partner or group. What do you think about that?
Well, there are definitely some pros and cons. On the plus side, having a study buddy can give you accountability, motivation, and support. It can be really helpful to have someone to bounce ideas off of, quiz each other, and just generally complain with when things get tough.
Yeah, misery loves company,
Yeah.
right? Especially when you're studying for like a super hard exam.
Right.
But seriously, I can totally see how having a study buddy could make the whole process feel less lonely and more fun.
Exactly. And it goes back to that human need for connection and support, even when we're talking about school stuff. However, it's super important to choose your study buddies carefully. You want someone who's just as committed to studying as you are and who learns in a similar way.
Otherwise, you might end up spending more time chatting and procrastinating than actually studying.
Exactly. And speaking of effective study techniques, the article talks about the importance of active learning. Have you ever heard of that?
I have. It sounds way more engaging than just passively reading a textbook and hoping the information magically sticks in your brain.
Yeah, exactly. Active learning is about finding ways to really interact with the material and make it your own. It could involve anything from highlighting key points and taking notes in your own words to creating flashcards, mind maps, or even teaching the concepts to someone else.
The teach-to-learn method. I've heard that's one of the best ways to really understand something.
It makes you organize your thoughts, figure out what you don't know, and explain things in a way that makes sense to someone else. It's a win-win.
And speaking of wins, the article also talks about celebrating your successes, both big and small. It might seem silly to reward yourself for something like finishing a chapter or doing well on a quiz, but I can see how those little celebrations could keep you motivated.
Absolutely. It's all about positive reinforcement. When we reward ourselves for our effort, we create this good feeling about studying. It doesn't feel like a chore anymore, and it feels more like something worthwhile. And the rewards don't have to be anything crazy. It could be as simple as watching your favorite show, treating yourself to something special, or doing something you enjoy after a productive study session.
Yeah, like giving yourself a little pat on the back for all that hard work.
Exactly. And this brings us to one final but really important part of studying that the article mentions: self-care.
Self-care during exam season. Those two things don't usually go together.
I know what you mean, but trust me, it's super important. You can't pour from an empty cup. Make sure you're getting enough sleep, eating healthy foods, and taking breaks to move your body and clear your head.
It's easy to forget about those things when you're stressed about exams. But I guess it's like those airplane safety instructions.
Yeah.
You need to put on your own oxygen mask first before helping anyone else.
Perfect analogy. Taking care of yourself isn't selfish. It's about making sure you're able to learn and do your best.
So we're talking about the whole package here: Motivation scheduling, managing distractions, finding support, active learning, rewarding ourselves, and self-care. It's like a holistic approach to conquering the study beast.
Exactly. It's about understanding that studying isn't just about memorizing facts. It's about creating the right environment and mindset for learning and growing.
And let's be real, it's about making the process a little less painful and a little more enjoyable, right?
Absolutely. There's no reason why studying can't be both productive and fulfilling.
Well said.
Yeah.
I think we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive.
Yeah, we have.
But don't worry, there's more to come. We'll be back in the next episode to explore even more ways to make studying less of a chore and more of an adventure.
Sounds good. Welcome back. Let's pick up where we left off and delve a bit deeper into active learning. It's a technique that can really change how you approach studying.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned it's about interacting with the material instead of just passively taking it in. But what does that actually look like? Can you give me some examples?
Of course. Think about it this way. Imagine you're trying to learn a new song on the piano. Would you just sit there and read the sheet music over and over, hoping your fingers will magically know what to do?
Probably not. I'd probably get frustrated and end up with a headache trying to figure out all those notes.
Exactly. And it's the same with studying. You have to actively engage with the material if you want to really understand it and remember it. So instead of just reading a chapter, try summarizing the main points in your own words. Or even better, try explaining it to someone else as if you were the teacher.
Right, like the teach to learn method.
Yeah.
I've always found that if I can explain something clearly to another person, it means I really get it myself.
Exactly. It forces you to get your thoughts in order, figure out where you might be missing something, and come up with creative ways to explain the information. And here's another active learning technique that can be really helpful, making flashcards.
Flashcards, I haven't used those since I was a kid.
Don't underestimate them. Flashcards are a great way to test yourself and see where you need to study more. And you can use them for anything from memorizing vocabulary to understanding tough scientific concepts.
So you write the term or concept on one side of the card and the definition or explanation on the other side, right?
Exactly. And the best thing about flashcards is that they're portable and you can use them anywhere, anytime. Plus, the act of writing down the information and then quizzing yourself helps you learn it better.
It's like you're creating your own personal study guide.
Yeah.
I like it. So what about mind maps? I've heard they're helpful for people who learn best visually, but I've never actually made one myself.
Mind maps are a fantastic way to see the connections between different ideas. You start with a main topic in the center and then branch out adding related ideas, subtopics, and examples.
So it's like a visual map of how everything fits together.
Exactly. And you can get as creative as you like with them. Use different colors, shapes, and pictures to make the information more memorable and interesting. Even the act of making the mind map is a form of active learning because it makes you really think about how the different concepts relate to each other.
That sounds like a great way to escape the boredom of just taking notes in a linear way and have a more visual and interactive way to learn.
Exactly. And speaking of interacting with the material, let's talk about one of the biggest struggles for many students, procrastination. You know that little voice that says, I'll do it later, or I have plenty of time, but then all of a sudden the deadline is here and you're rushing to catch up.
Procrastination. It's the worst. But why do we do it? What happens in our brains when we put things off even when we know it's not good for us?
Well, there are a lot of things going on, but often it boils down to fear. We might be afraid of failing, afraid of succeeding, or even just afraid of the work itself. Procrastination can be a way to avoid those uncomfortable feelings.
So it's kind of like a defense mechanism.
Exactly. And sometimes we procrastinate because we just don't feel motivated or we're not sure what our goals are. If we don't have a clear reason for doing something or what we want to achieve, it can be easy to put it off.
It's like trying to climb a mountain without knowing where the top is or why you're even climbing it in the first place.
Perfect analogy. But the good news is that there are things we can do to beat procrastination. One of the best is to break down those big, overwhelming tasks into smaller, more manageable steps.
We talked about that earlier for managing distractions and preventing burnout.
Mm.
But it applies here too, right?
Absolutely. Instead of looking at the whole giant task, try setting small, achievable goals for each study session. So instead of saying, I'm going to study for 3 hours tonight, say, I'm going to read one chapter and make flashcards for the key terms.
It's like taking those baby steps one at a time until you get to where you want to be.
Exactly. And here's another helpful tip. Set deadlines for yourself, even if your teacher or professor didn't give you one. This can create a sense of urgency and make you feel more accountable, which will help you stop procrastinating.
It's like you're creating your own pressure to get things done.
Exactly. And if you're really struggling with procrastination, try giving yourself rewards for finishing tasks, no matter how small.
The power of positive reinforcement.
Mm,
We talked about that before too, but it's so important.
it is. And here's another technique that can help get rid of distractions. We discussed this in terms of creating a focused study space, but it's just as important when it comes to fighting procrastination. If you're always getting interrupted by notifications, emails, and social media, it's going to be really hard to stay focused.
Yeah, it's like trying to meditate in the middle of a loud concert.
Exactly. So create a space where you won't be distracted, turn off your phone, and just concentrate on the task at hand.
It seems like a lot of these strategies for studying effectively are connected. Managing distractions, breaking down tasks, setting deadlines, rewarding yourself. It's all about making a system that helps you learn in a focused and productive way.
You're absolutely right. And that brings us to another important part of studying that we haven't talked about yet, understanding your learning style. Have you ever thought about how you learn best?
I've heard about different learning styles like visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, but I'm not really sure which one I am.
Well, that's a great place to start. There are lots of quizzes and tests online that can help you figure out what your main learning style is. And once you know how you learn best, you can adapt your study techniques to match.
So for example, if I'm a visual learner, I might do better with mind maps, diagrams, or flashcards. While if I'm an auditory learner, listening to recordings of lectures or talking about concepts with others might be more helpful.
Exactly. And if you're a kinesthetic learner, you might learn best by doing hands-on activities, experiments, or role-playing.
It's all about knowing your own strengths and preferences and then finding study methods that work for you.
Exactly. And, this brings us back to one of the main themes we've been talking about throughout this deep dive, personalization. There's no magic formula for studying. What works for one person might not work for another. The key is to try different things. Find what works best for you and then create a system that supports your unique learning style and goals.
It's like taking charge of your learning journey and becoming the boss of your own education.
I love that analogy. And speaking of taking charge, let's talk about one last but really important part of successful studying, taking care of your mental and physical health.
We touched on this earlier when we talked about self-care, but it's worth mentioning again because it's easy to forget about our own needs when we're feeling stressed and overwhelmed.
Absolutely. When we don't get enough sleep, are stressed out, or don't eat healthy foods, our brains don't work as well, and it becomes much harder to focus, learn, and remember things.
It's like trying to drive a car with no gas.
Yeah.
You might be able to go for a little while, but eventually you're going to stop.
Exactly. So make sure you're getting enough sleep, exercising, and eating healthy, and don't be afraid to take breaks when you need them. Remember, taking care of yourself isn't a luxury, it's a crucial part of learning.
It's about recognizing that our minds and bodies work together, and we need to take care of both to do our best.
Exactly. And with that, we come to the end of part 2 of our deep dive.
Wow, we've covered a lot in this episode, from figuring out our learning styles to beating procrastination. I feel like we've found so many useful strategies for studying effectively.
We have, and I'm excited to keep talking about it in our next episode, where we'll explore even more ways to make studying less of a chore and more of an adventure.
I can't wait. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into figuring out how to really get down to studying. After everything we've talked about, I'm actually feeling kind of pumped about hitting the books.
Me too. We've covered so much already, like understanding our own personal motivation and trying out active learning. And of course, we can't forget about tackling that procrastination monster.
It's pretty amazing how many useful tips we've gotten from just that one WikiHow article. But before we wrap things up, I think it'd be good to go over some of the key takeaways for everyone listening. After all, what's the point of all this knowledge if we don't actually use it?
Yeah, a recap is a good idea. Let's go back and highlight some of the main points.
Okay, so first things first, we talked about how important it is to figure out what motivates you to study. Why are you learning this stuff? Is it because you want to do well in your career? Or are you just passionate about this particular subject? Or maybe you just want to learn new things. Whatever your reason is, write it down, put it somewhere you can see it, and let it be that extra push to keep you going during your study sessions.
And remember, even subjects that seem boring can become interesting if you find a way to connect them to your own life and interests. Think about what motivated those historical figures, or try relating scientific concepts to things you see every day, or even find similarities between characters in books and people you know.
It's all about making those connections, finding those aha moments that help you remember the information. Okay, next we talked about how helpful it is to have a regular study routine, like making those study sessions important appointments with yourself.
But don't forget to be flexible, too. Life throws curveballs, and sometimes you gotta adjust your schedule. The important thing is to have a plan, but be ready to change it if you need to.
We also explored how crucial it is to create a study environment without distractions. Turn off those notifications. Find a quiet place. And try out techniques like that blank piece of paper trick to deal with those pesky thoughts that pop up in your head.
And when it comes to music, it's all about personal preference. Some people find it helpful to focus, while others find it distracting. Try different things out and see what works for you. As long as it helps you learn, that's all that matters.
Right. Then we dove into the world of active learning, where we emphasize that it's way more effective to interact with the material instead of just passively trying to absorb it.
Yeah, give it a try. Summarize the important points in your own words. Make some flashcards, or even try teaching the material to someone else. The more you actively work with the information, the better you'll understand and remember it.
And remember, taking breaks isn't a bad thing. It's actually really smart to prevent burnout. Recharge your batteries and come back to studying feeling refreshed and focused.
Absolutely. Try different break techniques like the Pomodoro technique and see which one works best for you.
We also talk about how important it is to have a supportive study environment. Not just the physical space, but also the people around you. Find study buddies who motivate and inspire you, and create a study space that helps you focus and concentrate.
And speaking of support, don't forget to celebrate your successes both big and small. Give yourself a reward for reaching those study milestones. Whether it's finishing a chapter, acing a quiz, or just sticking to your study schedule for a whole week.
Those little celebrations can really keep you motivated and help you create a positive connection with studying. And finally, we talked about taking care of yourself, realizing that your physical and mental health are super important for learning effectively.
Make sure you're getting enough sleep, eating nutritious food, exercising regularly, and taking time to relax and manage stress. Remember, you can't give what you don't have.
Wow, that's a pretty impressive set of tools to help us tackle those study sessions. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of what it means to study seriously. But without taking ourselves too seriously, right?
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between structure and flexibility, effort and enjoyment, pushing yourself, but also taking care of your well-being.
And it's about understanding that learning is a journey, not a destination. It's something we do throughout our lives.
Well said. And with that, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive. It's been great exploring these strategies with you.
The feeling is mutual. And to everyone listening, we hope you've learned some valuable things that will help you on your own learning adventures.
Remember, the most important thing is to figure out what works best for you and create a study system that supports your own unique learning style and goals.
So go out there, embrace the joy of learning, and remember, you got this.
Happy studying, everyone!